Just hours ago, the sky was lit up with explosions as Israel's Iron Dome defense system shot down Iranian missiles. And this is a developing story and a breaking one. So I'd like to clarify an important detail from our conversation at the top of this show. According to Israeli medics, at least 22 people have been injured in these attacks on Israel today. We do not have reporting at this time now on any deaths. Now, those attacks were launched less than 24 hours after a large-scale Israeli attack on Iran. It was aimed at breaking down the country's military and nuclear program, as well as its leadership. Now, Canada and other world leaders are urging de-escalation, as some of those same leaders are about to land in Canada for the G7 summit. It's the first time Prime Minister Mark Carney will play host to a summit of this size, and it's all taking place in Kananaskis, Alberta, starting on Sunday. So how could the risk of a wider regional war in the Middle East impact Carney's agenda? Well, the people who help with the agenda are called Sherpas. And Canada's Sherpa, the last time our country hosted this summit in 2018, is Senator Peter Boehm. And he joins me right now. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So that's where I want to start. How does the agenda possibly shift? And is there a shadow cast over this summit now as a result of what we're seeing in the Middle East?
Well, I think we have to remember this is the 50th summit, so there have been crises before. And the Sherpas do a certain amount of work in terms of preparing the agenda and initiatives. But the leaders always have that flexibility, this informality, because it is an informal international organization, to switch, to move, to pivot, depending on what the big issues are. So security, international security was always part of the program. Obviously, what is happening between Iran and Israel is going to be added on to the discussion on Gaza and certainly the discussion on Ukraine, because President Zelensky will be there.
One of the developments that we heard this week was that it's kind of shifting expectations from the Prime Minister and essentially saying, don't expect a final communique, but we're expecting these sort of shorter statements of agreement going forward. As someone who has put together these types of communiques and put a lot of work into them, how do you feel about things going this way now and sort of shifting not only the expectations, but the way we're communicating now, instead of a long communique that everybody agrees on, that maybe having shorter statements? Do you think that's a better way of going?
Well, a couple of thoughts on that, Mike, because wouldn't be the first time that it's a chair statement. Last time at Kananaskis, it was the G8 in 2002. It was a chair statement. It was right after 9/11. The French, following us in 2019, also had a chair statement. So if you're going to issue individual declarations on issues, whether it's artificial intelligence, wildfires, a statement on Ukraine, for example, you can do that, and you can still have a chair statement that indicates what leaders discussed. If you want to have a negotiated communique that shows consensus, when there isn't consensus on everything, then you're boiling it down to a lowest common denominator that is not going to convince anyone.
But is it lesser than, because you're doing this?
I don't think it's lesser than at all. It will be the leaders. They met, this is what they discussed, and this is what they instructed their foreign ministers or their finance ministers, or indeed they agreed to meet again and to discuss other matters. So you can have all of that.
Yeah, and that communique was at the heart of a very famous photo that I think a lot of people know that came out of the G7 in Charlevoix, and it was a photo that we'll put up now. It was about the joint communique and the wording of it and the rules-based international order. You have said that President Donald Trump did not torpedo that G7 summit, but it did come close. So this is Trump's first major summit in Trump 2.0. How do you think he should be handled differently, if at all? And there you are on the left-hand side of that photo there with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And that's kind of one part of the photo where you were talking about the communique and Donald Trump is sitting there. Do you think we should handle him differently in this iteration of his presidency?
Well, I think the Prime Minister said it quite correctly when he was at the Oval Office, and he said directly to President Trump that he's a transformational president. And President Trump is a transformational president, too, in terms of how summits work. So instead of fighting over language, have a good discussion, have some outcomes that everyone can agree on, and then have that healthy debate. And that is what G7 leaders have done. That's certainly what happened at Charlevoix, and any time Canada has hosted a summit.
Go back to the photo just quickly. Was it as tense as it looked?
No. It was after a luncheon of the Gender Equality Advisory Council. President Trump wanted to leave because he was going to be going to Singapore to meet with Kim Jong-un. And I said to Prime Minister Trudeau, we don't have agreement on this very last bit, and that's where the leaders are going to have to make a determination. And they made a determination, and everyone thought they could wordsmith better than the other, and maybe Angela Merkel came out on top. I haven't read her autobiography yet.
Yeah, we'll see in that autobiography. When you think of what we can expect out of the G7, there are some wins to be had, and I look at the fact that the Mexican president is coming, even though she doesn't really travel very often. What kind of opportunity do you think that there is for Canada, the U.S., and Mexico on the sidelines of this to get some work done on the tariff issue?
Well, there's the potential there for a step aside, to use a term of art, for the three of them to say, look, CUSMA is coming up for review in 2026. What are we going to do about that? And how will the tariff issue play in that context? And the three, if they're face-to-face, if they have even just a few minutes, could engage on that if they want to. President Sheinbaum clearly wants to have a bilateral meeting with President Trump. She's not met him yet.
Yeah.
So maybe that would be a better venue than the Oval Office. Just saying.
Where we know it could be fraught with some landmines at times. I wanted to ask you about one of the controversial invitations, and that is of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It has come under criticism in this country. It comes as there's an ongoing investigation into allegations that the Modi government was involved in connection with killing Sikh activists on Canadian soil. This is something that the Indian government has denied. Do you think it was a good idea to have Prime Minister Modi here on Canadian soil at this time?
I think it's a good idea to meet with him. Clearly, the Prime Minister is reaching out. Prime Minister Modi has been at the last 5 G7 summits, so not to invite him could have been seen as a snub as well. And here's an opportunity for the two of them to sit down and say, yeah, we have some problems. Our people have been talking. Now you and I are talking.
How important is that conversation? And I'm saying that because there is a thought process out there of don't invite him because we're in the middle of this investigation, because the allegations are so serious. But I also know in diplomatic circles, there's also a thought of better to have them at the table than to push them away.
Well, my DNA is diplomatic. That's what I did in my previous career. And it is better to have them at the table, even though it might not be pleasant and the conversations could be very direct.
And how important is it to have that type of a direct conversation with him in this moment?
Well, you have to start somewhere. And I think one of the features of this summit is going to be a great plethora of bilateral meetings as leaders are lining up to meet with President Trump, lining up to meet with each other. There will be 4 new leaders there, even in the G7 context. And they're going to want to meet with the host.
Yeah, and so everybody will be lined up and trying to...
That's right.
All of this in a couple of days, if that's possible, to get it done.
Yeah, but as I said at the outset, there is some intrinsic flexibility in the G7. It's not a hard-baked agenda. The leaders can still decide what they want to do. The chair, Prime Minister Carney, can say, okay, we're going to have a discussion that's going to be a little bit shorter on this subject, and I want to delve more deeply into that one.
Yeah. Okay, interesting to watch. Senator Peter Boehm, former Sherpa of the G7. Appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you, Mike.